government once used children as bait to lure out an unknown species hiding in the treetops, and one of those children came back. In the fall of 2018, a photographer and a wildlife researcher vanished deep inside timberline forest during a secret survey. Their last recovered footage showed something unnatural: massive nests, three-toed footprints, shattered animal bones, and a bracelet belonging to a girl who disappeared in the same forest back in 1991. But the truth no one talks about is this. Timberline was once the testing ground for Project Lament, a covert experiment to study an intelligent pack-hunting species known only as shadowborn. One child survived and returned as an adult, hiding a dark secret. In this video, you'll uncover why these creatures have never been caught, how Jonas betrayed his childhood promise for science, and what it means when a creature returns, wearing the bracelet of a long-lost girl. The final footage is haunting. Ella, crying silently, places the bracelet over the creature's heart. Royce dies protecting them. Jonas disappears. And the official story? Bear attack. If you skip this video, you'll miss a truth buried for decades, evidence that may be erased forever. This leak won't last long. It started with silence, too deep, too clean. The kind of silence that presses against your ears like altitude, that lets you hear your own blood like it's not supposed to be there. Detective Lena Croft sat hunched over the cold kitchen table of her rented apartment in Aberdeen, staring at the edge of a small cardboard parcel like it might hiss at her if she touched it wrong. 4 months. 4 months since Ella and Jonas Warren disappeared without a sound in Timberline Reserve. 4 months of empty reports, staged press conferences, and hushed forest patrols with nothing to show but wind and leaves. And now this. No return address, no markings, just her name, spelled perfectly. And inside, a cracked SD card in a tiny plastic bag, and a single note written in what looked like graphite on old graph paper. Watch it alone, she did. And everything she thought she had buried since 1991 clawed its way back up. The video began with static, then a warbled flicker of green-brown hues, the digital grain of low-light footage. A ground-level shot, probably a camera left behind on a tripod, half tilted in the dirt. Leaves trembled in the frame like they were shivering. Then came movement, first just a blur, then clarity. Ella's face pale, dirt-smudged, eyes wild. She was backing up, one hand gripping Jonas's wrist tight, her lips moving in a silent scream. Jonas looked over his shoulder towards something outside the frame, then pulled Ella harder. And then she stopped, whipped her head to the right, and stared at something beyond the edge. Her breath fogged the lens. A sound, not a roar, not an animal, something thinner, higher, like wind dragging steel. The picture trembled, then nothing, just black. But it wasn't just the fear on Ella's face that froze Lena. It was what she saw 2 frames before the cut. A small bracelet half buried in the moss glinting beneath Ella's boot. A plastic charm shaped like a fox, red and white. It had belonged to Sophie, her little sister, 27 years gone, lost in the same woods. The case that broke her, the one that never let her sleep again. And here it was, caught in 2 frames under the foot of a woman who vanished the same way. She didn't pack much, just the old file box she kept hidden behind books she never opened. Sophie's file, the one she wasn't supposed to have, the one the department had scrubbed after they put her on forced leave for psychological instability. She remembered their words heavy with pity. You were too close to the victim. They had no idea, not even close. The drive into the Olympic Mountains was longer than she remembered. The forest had changed, but not in any way that made sense. The trees looked bigger, tighter, hungrier. The road narrowed faster than it should have, and even though it was early afternoon, the light had that fading amber tinge like dusk was creeping in ahead of schedule. Timberline wasn't on the official map anymore. Not really. Just a few scribbled lines in the margin of an old ranger chart she'd found on a conspiracy blog 2 years ago and saved out of spite. The gates were gone, rusted down to hinges. The wooden sign, once a bright welcome to eco-tourists and school field trips, now hung sideways, slashed clean across the words, Wildlife Reserve. Like something had clawed the life off on purpose. She parked the car just inside the tree line and locked it, even though there was no one around to steal it. Old habits. Her boots sank into the earth with a squelch. Damp, too damp, even for fall. Leaves underfoot hadn't turned gold like they should have. They were mottled, brown-black, curled in on themselves like fists. Timberline was supposed to be a place of serenity, a model of conservation, but it had always felt off. Even when she came here as a kid, it didn't feel like a park. It felt like a waiting room for something deeper, something older, something that didn't need names. She took the ridge path first, the one that looped around the outer boundary. The trees here bent slightly toward the center like they'd grown inward over time, pulled by some gravity that didn't obey science. And every few yards, she thought she saw something shift just at the edge of her vision. Not animals, not birds, just absence, pockets of stillness that didn't belong. By the time she reached the old visitor station, the sun was low. The building was skeletal, roof caved in, glass panes shattered, vines choking every surface like veins. She stepped inside, careful not to disturb the silence. Dust coated the remains of pamphlets, maps, a kid's drawing pinned to a rotting corkboard. A fox, red and white. Same charm, same little smile. Her hand trembled as she reached up and took it down. She didn't sleep that night, just listened. Outside, the forest didn't whisper, it held its breath. Not a single animal sound, no crickets, no wind, just the weight of stillness pressing harder every hour. She turned the SD card over and over in her fingers. Something about it felt warm, almost like it had been waiting. She loaded it into her own drone rig the next morning. It buzzed to life and hovered, capturing the canopy above. She pushed it higher, higher, until it broke through the fog line. What it saw up there made her breath hitch. A clearing, circular, too perfect. And in the center, dark against the rust-colored leaves, a shape, not a structure, something woven, grown. A dome of branches bent into spirals, radiating outward. And something inside, moving, crawling, but only for a second. The feed glitched, then black. The drone dropped like a stone. She didn't go after it. Not yet. Instead, she stood at the edge of the clearing just beyond the tree line and looked down. There, half covered in moss, was a print. Not a shoe, not a boot, something wider, longer, with toes. 5, human-shaped, but not human. Not anymore. Lena knelt, reached out, touched the edge. Still warm. The forest around her moaned, a low, almost imperceptible sound, like bark splitting under pressure. She rose slowly. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was breathing. The forest didn't greet them, it swallowed them. Jonas stepped first, boots sinking into the soft rot just beyond the old boundary marker. Ella followed, fingers brushing the frayed nylon strap of her pack, eyes scanning the dim spaces between trees. They had parked a mile down, left the main trail behind, intentionally, deliberately, choosing instead a narrow, overgrown path that wasn't printed on any official Timberline Reserve map. The air grew colder the moment they crossed that invisible line, like the woods were drawing breath inward. She didn't say it aloud, but Ella felt it instantly, the tilt in the earth, the hush in the branches, the weight of something old and watching. Above them, clouds moved like bruises across the sky, thickening, pressing down. The light had that late October cast to it, gray with an edge of yellow. Somewhere deep in the fog ahead, a crow called once, sharp and flat, then silence. They made camp near a lake no one remembered. It didn't have a name, at least not one you could find online. Just a wide expanse of still water wrapped in mist, reeds curling at the edges like claws, the surface broken only by the slow drift of dead leaves. Ella zipped their tent shut with a low flick of her wrist and turned to Jonas, her voice quiet but certain. "You sure this is the place?" He nodded too quickly. That night, the forest whispered wrong. It wasn't just the usual shifting of branches or the distant bark of coyotes. It was rhythmic, deliberate, 3 soft knocks, then stillness, then again, slower, heavier. Not owl calls, not woodpeckers. Something else, something rehearsed. Ella lay awake, her hand clutching the zipper of the tent like it was a weapon. Beside her, Jonas pretended to sleep. She knew the rhythm of his breath too well not to notice. He was listening too. Every few minutes, a shadow crossed the nylon wall of the tent, long, lanky, slow. No footsteps, just the blur of movement like something crawling upright. By morning, she found her GPS off by almost half a mile. Same waypoint, but shifted west, as if someone or something had moved the coordinates while the device was off. Jonas brushed it off with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Might have been the magnetics," he said, "happens in dense canopies." But Ella wasn't looking at the trees. She was looking at him. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his hand kept touching his jacket pocket over and over. Later, as she boiled water for coffee, the world exploded. A white-tailed deer, foam dripping from its mouth, crashed through the underbrush like a cannonball. It tore through the camp, eyes glassy with panic, and slammed full force into the side of their tent. The nylon ripped open with a violent shriek. Ella screamed. Jonas stumbled back, arms shielding his face, and the deer, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle, collapsed in a twitching heap by the fire pit. Its legs kicked once, then stopped, blood soaked into the soil beneath its jaw, still warm. Its eyes stared glassy at nothing. Its throat, from base to jaw, had been clawed open, not shredded by teeth, but gouged in clean, deliberate arcs. And on the back of its neck, 3 long, deep slashes. Not from a cougar, not from anything Ella had studied. Jonas stood very still, too still. Ella turned to him. "We need to go back." But he shook his head. "No, not yet." That night, she waited until he slept, or at least pretended to. She unzipped the tent slowly, careful not to let the nylon pop. The woods were motionless. Moonlight caught on dew-soaked bark, turning everything silver. She moved to Jonas's pack, found what she already suspected, a folded, ancient-looking paper map, thicker than modern print, creased, stained. And on it, beneath penciled ridges and faded ink, a red X scratched in the middle of nowhere. Next to it, in cramped, rushed handwriting, Project Lament. She didn't wake him, didn't scream, she just stared at the mark. Her fingers shook. In the dark beyond camp, something rustled. Not leaves, not wind. Something breathing. The next morning, he found her crouched by the lake's edge, eyes red, map open in her lap. "You lied," she said, not looking at him. Jonas knelt beside her. The mask he'd worn cracked a little. "I didn't know how to tell you." "You were here before," she said, "weren't you?" He didn't answer. They packed up in silence. The forest didn't move with them. It stayed still, like it was waiting for something, watching. Around noon, Jonas launched the drone. It rose steady through the mist, cutting a clean path up through the branches. Ella watched the feed on the tablet. Grainy, fuzzy. Then clearing, a clearing. Circular, dead center in a nowhere that shouldn't exist. No trails, no paths, just raw space carved by design, not accident. And there, in the center, something impossible. A structure built of twisted branches, interlocked like a nest, but not animal, not human. A dome of woven limbs spiraling outward in fractal geometry. Too perfect to be chance. And inside, a movement, something alive. something watching the drone, and just before the feed died, it moved. Not away. It's toward the lens, then black. The drone plummeted. They didn't speak for a long time. Back at the site, Ella replayed the footage, frame by frame, scrubbing slowly through the static. Her breath caught. At the very end, just before the feed went dark, something crouched beside their tent, hunched, covered in matted fur. And in its long, narrow hand, it was holding something. A bracelet. Child-sized. She froze the frame. The bracelet disappeared into the flap of Jonas's pack. It hadn't been there before. Jonas was asleep, or pretending again. Ella stepped back. The woods around her blurred. Somewhere deep beyond the trees, something tapped. 3 times. And then again, slower. Ella didn't run. She listened. The trees grew closer the deeper they went, like they'd been rearranging themselves overnight, stitching tighter to keep something in, or something out. Morning light barely touched the forest floor. It broke through in fractured columns, thin as needles, flickering like breath held too long. Every step Jonas took seemed more hesitant, like he already knew what they'd find. Ella didn't speak. Her thoughts moved too fast, chasing shadows of things that hadn't yet happened but felt inevitable. The drone crash had been sudden, yes, but not random. And the footage, she kept seeing that structure in her mind. Not built, woven, shaped by hands that didn't belong to any known species. They moved toward the last GPS ping. Crunches of twigs underfoot became the only sound, swallowed as quickly as they came. The silence returned faster now, as if the woods were growing more efficient in absorbing noise. Jonas scanned ahead, jaw tight. Ella stayed behind him, eyes darting upward, following branches. It didn't make sense. Why did everything up there feel heavier than below? They found the drone cracked open at the base of a twisted cedar. Propellers snapped. The lens spidered in a perfect radial burst. She crouched beside it and picked up a fragment of casing, still damp. It hadn't been here long. A few feet away, something caught the light. She reached for it before realizing what it was. A bracelet. Child-sized. Not new. The clasp was rusted, the plastic fox charm faded and scratched. Ella turned it over in her palm, heartbeat rising. It wasn't hers, it wasn't Jonas's, and it hadn't been in the forest last night. Jonas didn't move. He stared at it like it might catch fire. She knew he recognized it. Neither of them spoke. Then she saw the nest. It was maybe 50 feet beyond the drone, half concealed by underbrush and the way the trees leaned, but visible from just the right angle. The structure towered 12 feet high, a dome made entirely of bent branches, twisted roots, leaves woven into thick mats that pulsed softly in the wind. But it wasn't the size that froze her. It was the design. Spirals, everything spiraled, outward from the center like a maze. Concentric rings built from interlocked wood and what looked disturbingly like animal hair. It wasn't chaotic. It was patterned, ritualistic. Ella moved closer. Her boots crunched on a pile of bones. Dozens of small skeletons arranged in messy heaps. Birds, rodents, a few raccoon skulls cracked open with precision, not chewed, split, like someone had harvested them. Most of the bones were snapped at the midpoint, tibia, femur, sternum, all in the same place. Like marrow had been the target. Jonas knelt beside a grouping and picked up a tiny jawbone. It broke in his hand, brittle as old glass. There was no sign of fire anywhere, but tucked into the outer edge of the nest, half buried under a lattice of sticks, was a thin copper wire curled into a loop. A child's toy maybe, or a trap, or a marker. Ella felt it before she heard it. That sense of being seen, not watched. Sane. She stood slowly, her breath clouded in the cold. Behind her, Jonas scanned the tree line, lips parted. No sound. But then, light. A flicker, a shimmer like eyes catching a flash, high. too high. 8 feet up, clinging to the branch like it belonged there, a pair of irises glowed yellow-green, round, unblinking. Then they vanished. Ella turned to Jonas, her voice low. "Something's in the trees." He didn't argue. She lifted her camera, zoomed in on the canopy, clicked the shutter slowly. Nothing visible to the naked eye, but in playback, there it was, a blur. Not a shape exactly, but the echo of one. Clinging to bark like a second skin, limbs longer than they should be. Covered in something too dark to be fur but not skin, it crouched, then slipped backward out of view with unnatural silence. Jonas's hand went to his chest, not his heart, his jacket. He reached inside and froze. Then Ella saw it, the bracelet, the same bracelet that had been on the ground, now in his pocket. But she just picked it up. She held it still in her hand. Her breath hitched. "Jonas!" He looked down, confused, pulled it out. There were 2, identical, even the scratch on the fox's eye. He dropped them both as if they burned, stepped back. From the nest, something stirred. The outer edge shivered, not from wind, from breath, and something small emerged. It wasn't a creature, not entirely. It was hunched, covered in matted brown-gray hair, lank limbs ending in long fingers that dragged slightly as it crawled. Eyes too big, a face too flat, and yet familiar. Ella stepped back. Jonas didn't. He took a step forward. The thing stopped, tilted its head. Then, in complete silence, it reached toward him, slow, deliberate, and placed something on the ground. A third bracelet. Jonas didn't move, didn't breathe. It placed the charm gently, touched it with one finger. Then it turned without looking at them and slipped into the structure like fog into a crack. Gone. Ella stared at the bracelets. 3. Not 1, not 2. 3. Jonas knelt, picked up the new one. His voice broke. "I've seen this before." She waited. "In the hospital," he said. "When I was a kid. They said I was found alone in the woods." Ella's throat tightened. "I had this on my wrist. They said it was mine, but it wasn't." From inside the nest, something low and deep groaned. Not a growl, not a moan. A call. It was calling him. She reached for him, but Jonas stepped closer. The moment the wind shifted, Jonas felt it in his spine. A weight pressed in from all sides, like the trees themselves were tightening their grip on the forest floor. He turned, slowly, just as the brush behind him split open. A man, filthy, bearded, eyes wild, burst from the undergrowth and slammed him to the ground with the force of someone who'd been running on fear alone. "They know who you are," the man hissed, voice cracked like dried bark, hands trembling as he pinned Jonas down. "They remember. You can't back out now," Ella screamed. Jonas tried to shove the stranger off but froze when he saw the man's eyes. Clear, alert, too focused to be deranged. Not some lost camper, not a lunatic. This was someone who knew where he was. And why. The man finally let go, stepped back, breathing hard, shoulders shaking. "You don't remember, do you?" he muttered, half to himself. "They always come back when you forget." He turned and walked away like he expected them to follow. Like there wasn't any other option. Ella looked at Jonas. He didn't move. So she did. They followed the stranger through thick brush, over wet roots, beneath tangles of dying vines and branches that hung low like arms. His name, he eventually told them, was Royce Harland. Former head ranger of Timberline, retired. Vanished from public records almost a decade ago. Most thought he was dead. In reality, he'd been hiding. They reached what looked like an abandoned ranger station, but the structure was stronger than it appeared. Reinforced from the inside, blacked-out windows, steel bars on what used to be a supply closet. Royce pushed open the warped wooden door and waved them in. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and old paper. Dust danced in the single beam of sunlight that pierced a hole in the ceiling. Boxes were stacked floor to rafters. Maps, charts, photographs yellowed with age. He pointed to the back wall. There it was again, the spiral, drawn in thick black ink, scrawled over a map of timberline that looked older than both of them combined. Royce threw a bundle of folders on the table, pages fanned out, typed reports, handwritten notes, audio transcripts. Project Lament stamped across the top in faded red ink. They brought me in when sightings started back in '84. Thought it was just local legend. Sasquatch, Wendigos, forest ghosts, shit like that. I didn't buy into it until I heard the recordings. He pulled out a cassette tape, slid it into a dusty player. Static, then a hum. And beneath it a sound, layered, guttural, not language but not random either. Like something trying to mimic speech through bone. They don't talk the way we do, they echo, reflect. If you scream, they don't run, they wait and they remember. Ella sat stiff, eyes fixed on a photograph tacked above the desk. A team of scientists, 5 people standing in front of the same ranger station they were in now. Smiles frozen. One of them, a woman with dark hair and a sharp jawline, wore a necklace. Child's bracelet looped through the chain. Jonas stepped toward it slowly. She worked the behavioral unit, Royce said. They thought the creatures could be trained, studied, brought in slowly like a pack of wolves. Problem is, they weren't animals. Not in the way science understands them. They were communal. Not pack, collective. Think, memory without a body. Trauma passed down like breath. He opened a journal, pages filled with drawings. Eyes on trees, teeth on roots, hands longer than arms. We called them the Shadowborn. They nest high, but not for safety, for silence. They don't like sound. That's why they kill quickly, not for hunger, for quiet. Jonas's throat tightened. You said they know me. Royce stared at him. They saved you, that's why you're still here, but you broke whatever pact was made. Maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe someone else did, doesn't matter, they don't forget. Ella stood. You were part of this. You knew children were involved. I didn't know they'd use them as bait, Royce said quietly. They just said we needed to study how they react to vulnerability, fear. They thought it'd draw the creatures out. So they sent in one kid, just one. He looked at Jonas, and Jonas finally remembered. Flashes at first, cold hands pulling him from a pit. The taste of sap on his lips, waking in the arms of something warm, humming in low tones that buzzed through his chest. He'd been no older than 5, thought it was a dream. Doctors said memory loss from trauma, but it wasn't loss, it was buried, hidden. He'd lied to himself for decades. Outside, the sky darkened suddenly, not dusk, not clouds, just wrong. Light stopped moving. Ella peered through the boarded window. Trees still, not a single leaf stirred. Something's out there, she whispered. Royce grabbed a flare gun, loaded it. We stay in here, we die. They don't breach unless they're sure. Jonas shook his head. Sure of what? That you belong to them or that you don't. They exited through the back, Royce leading. The woods pressed in immediately, shadows thicker, branches lower. They moved fast, no one talking. Royce stopped once, turned to Jonas. You're the only one they've ever spared. Whatever it was, they believed you. I didn't say anything to them. You didn't have to. They moved through a cut trail, barely wide enough for one. Royce raised his hand and held them back. The sound came first, like vines twisting around a tree, pulling bark until it cracked. Then silence. Then from above, leaves rustled. Not by wind. By weight. Royce turned. We're out of time. But Jonas had already stepped forward. Something was watching. He could feel it. His chest ached where the old scar from childhood still faintly marked his skin, right above the heart, a place where something once touched him and left him alive. He looked up, and in the trees a silhouette shifted. Low shoulders, long arms, eyes that did not glow but shimmered. They remembered, and they were waiting. It had been quiet for too long. Not the hush of untouched forest, but the kind of quiet that came when something else was listening harder than you were breathing. Jonas felt it in his skin, tight and hot, and in the low throb behind his eyes like the pressure before a migraine. Ella walked 5 paces ahead, her silhouette flickering between shafts of amber light and looming shade. She hadn't spoken to him since they left Royce. Her silence wasn't angry, it was hollow, like she was carrying something that didn't belong to her anymore. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge where the drone had crashed. The forest opened slightly, a shallow basin choked with twisted ferns and deadfall. Here, the trees bent inward like ribs, closing in around a forgotten lung. A faint chemical scent floated on the breeze, metallic, sour, unnatural. Ella knelt by a clump of moss and touched a tiny smear of blue. It wasn't sap, it shimmered slightly. Same color she remembered from the bracelet Sophie wore, the one now sitting in her pack. She followed the trail, slow and methodical, checking every leaf, every displaced pebble. Her mind ran loops, connecting fragments too painful to stare at directly. She didn't want to believe it, but the signs kept drawing her deeper. Jonas hung back, one hand hovering near his chest, the other gripping a map he hadn't yet explained. She hadn't asked yet, but the weight of it hung between them. She'd seen the red markings, the name scrawled along the tree line. Project Lament, no coordinates, just a symbol. The spiral again drawn sharp and shaking as if whoever wrote it had been cold or terrified or both. The argument came quietly. She'd found a break in the ground, a collapse barely wider than her body covered by fallen bark. A fissure. Not a natural one. Something man-made, then swallowed by time. She called to Jonas. He didn't answer. She turned and saw him holding the map with both hands, staring at it like it might bite him. "You lied to me," she said. His eyes flicked up, startled but not surprised. "You knew this place existed, you marked it." He hesitated, then folded the map. "I didn't know what it was." "That's bullshit." "I didn't know what it would mean." She stepped forward. "That you were brought here? That you were part of this?" "I was taken, Ella. I was a child. I didn't ask for any of it." She stared hard. "But you made a promise, didn't you? You knew something was waiting and you came back anyway." He said nothing. "Why?" He looked down, voice raw. "Because I thought I could undo it. I thought if I gave them something they wanted, they'd forget me." She moved to speak but stopped. Her throat closed. Something in her wanted to scream. Something older said to run. She walked away instead, into the trees. Away from the lie he'd been carrying like a second skin. The pit opened beneath her without warning. She didn't fall far, 6 feet maybe. But the landing knocked the breath from her. Her elbow struck stone. She rolled, coughing, dirt in her mouth. Dim light filtered down through the foliage, casting patterns on the walls around her. Ugh. Not just roots. Marks, symbols scratched into the stone. Spirals, hands, eyes. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding, reaching up toward the edge. Her fingers barely grazed it. Then she heard it. Not a growl, not a breath. The soft shift of something crouching nearby. Ella froze. It moved again, closer this time, but not threatening, not rushing. She turned slowly. A small figure stood near the far wall, just within the shadows. Covered in fur matted with clay and sap, limbs long and curved like branches. One hand on the wall, the other pressed to its chest. She couldn't see its eyes, but it was looking right at her. The creature took one step forward. She didn't scream. It crouched, placed both hands on the ground and tilted its head like a child learning a new face. Then with a careful movement, it stepped toward her and reached out. Its fingertip touched her wrist. Just one beat. Warm. Then it moved, not up, but to her backpack. It tugged the flap open, reached in and gently removed one of the bracelets. Held it for a second, then pressed it against its own chest. A sound came from its throat. Not speech, not even a cry, just a hum, a vibration, so low it trembled through her ribs. Then it reached out again, and offered her its hand. She took it. The creature pulled her up with surprising strength, lifting her out of the hole like she weighed nothing. Jonas stood nearby, stunned. The creature looked at him, then back at Ella. Its chest rose and fell in a soft rhythm. Then it turned and vanished into the trees with movements that didn't disturb the leaves. Jonas stepped closer. She didn't look at him. "You knew it would come," she said. He nodded. "When?" "I was 8. I'd gotten lost in a storm. I fell down a slope. I should have died." He looked at the dirt. His hand trembled as he reached for his chest. "It found me. I think it was young then, like now. It laid me down beside a spring, covered me in moss. It sang to me. I didn't understand it, but I knew it wasn't trying to hurt me. And you promised it something." His silence was answer enough. "I promised I'd never come back, that I'd keep them away, that I wouldn't let them take more." Ella's voice was low. "But you did?" He met her gaze. "Because someone paid me to. I sold the coordinates to a conservation firm. I didn't think. I thought maybe they were gone, that they'd left, or that it was all just trauma-twisting memories. You betrayed it. I betrayed myself." He looked away. "And now, it's not me they want." She didn't ask who. He already knew. From the woods ahead, the light shifted again. Not darker, brighter almost, as if something glowed just beyond the trees. Jonas stepped forward without a word, and above them, between the trunks high in the canopy, a shape moved. Waiting, watching, not angry. Not yet. The forest was too still. That kind of stillness that didn't mean peace, just pause. Like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for one sound to snap everything loose. Royce knew what that sound was supposed to be. He crouched beneath a fallen cedar, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the old recorder. Its plastic casing was cracked, held together with duct tape and rust, but it still worked. 3 small copper whistles dangled from his neck on a faded paracord. Each one was carved different, tuned different. The one he needed had a small notch near the mouthpiece, like a bite had been taken out of it. That one had worked before. Or at least, it hadn't gotten him killed. He brought it to his lips. Blue. 3 sharp tones overlapping, one high, one flat, one low enough to rattle your molars if you were close. The sound cut through the woods like a blade, then faded. Silence returned. Then came the reply. From above, far above. 3 tones. Longer this time, stretched, echoing through the canopy like they were dripping down from the bones of the trees themselves. Royce closed his eyes. They remembered. That was good. That was dangerous. He turned to Lena, who stood rigid behind the trunk, fingers curled tight around the infrared scanner they'd salvaged from Royce's stash. Her eyes weren't afraid. They were focused. Grief had hardened her into something sharp. "They'll come for the sound," Royce said quietly. "But only if they trust it. If they think it's kin." Lena's voice was flat. "And if they don't? They don't waste energy, they rip it apart." She didn't flinch. He looked back toward the open field. Timberline's heart was changing. Royce could feel it in his teeth, in the cracks in the ground. The forest wasn't growing anymore, it was pulsing, like veins, like breath. "Jonas is still alive," Lena said, not like a question. Royce nodded slowly. "They wouldn't let him go until it's finished." Ella stepped forward from behind the tree line. Her clothes were torn, blood dried at her collarbone, but she moved like she'd found something worse than fear and chosen to walk through it anyway. In her hand, tightly wrapped in a bundle of moss, was the same whistle Royce had given her back at the station. She hadn't used it. She hadn't needed to. "It gave him back to me," she whispered. "The little one. It helped me out of the hole. It touched my face." Lena turned. "Did it say anything?" Ella shook her head. "No, but it cried." Royce stared at her for a long time, then looked to the trees. They don't cry unless they're about to lose something. They move fast after that. Royce led them through a shallow ravine filled with cold fog, the kind that clung to your ankles like hands. Every few minutes he stopped and placed a thin strip of cloth dipped in animal scent along the trail. Not bait. Warning, territory. He was trying to make the humans smell less like prey. The scanner in Lena's hand started to flicker near the edge of the hollow. Movement. 8 feet up. 2 bodies, then 3, then gone. Ella's breath caught. They're surrounding us. Royce nodded. We're in their lungs now. Ahead, the trees thinned slightly, revealing a steep drop. An eroded slope leading down into the mouth of what looked like an old washout. But in the center, beneath twisted limbs and shattered stone, was something else. Nest wasn't the right word. Not anymore. It was architecture. Organic. Grown into itself. Layers of wood, hair, bone woven together in thick spiraling ridges. An opening at the top let in pale light. Moonlight maybe, though the sky was dark. Inside, it smelled like salt and rot and sap. They climbed down slowly. Lena took the lead, Ella behind. Royce brought up the rear, laying strips of black powder across the path. Not explosive, just scent. Enough to say these are not food, these are memory. Inside it was too quiet. Jonas was there, hanging, suspended between 3 birch trunks. Arms slack, head down, chest rising faintly. His wrists were tied with braided bark. His feet didn't touch the ground. But he was breathing. Ella ran to him. Royce didn't stop her. She touched his face, whispering his name. No response. But his breath caught. Then from the darkness near the back wall, something moved. A figure larger than the others. Taller, shoulders wide, not built like the smaller ones that had helped her before. This one had age in the way it moved. Authority. Scars across its side. Its fur was darker, thicker, with patches missing. Its face had lines, not human ones, but something that mimicked age, like bark weathered by storms. It stepped forward. The room held its breath. Royce stepped between them and raised his hands. He didn't speak. He took the whistle, played it once. The creature's eyes didn't move. Then it raised one hand and pointed. To Jonas. To Ella. Then down. Ella looked where it pointed. A small figure stepped out from the dark, the young one. It walked to Ella slowly, then placed one hand on her cheek. Its other hand reached for Jonas's chest. It pressed a claw to his sternum, then closed its eyes. A low sound filled the room like a hum beneath the earth. Not loud, but dense. Royce flinched. Lena staggered. Ella grabbed Jonas's arm and held it as the sound grew tighter, sharper. Jonas gasped, then choked, then opened his eyes. He stared straight into the face of the creature in front of him and didn't scream. He nodded. The young one stepped back, then placed something in his hand. A seed, no bigger than a pebble. Then it turned and walked back into the dark. The elder followed. Ella cut the ropes. Jonas collapsed into her arms, barely able to stand. His skin was cold, his chest was wet, but he was alive. Royce knelt by the floor, touched the moss. They gave him back. Lena didn't move. They don't do that, she said. Royce nodded. Not unless they want something worse instead. Outside, the air was different, heavier. Royce stepped through the entryway last. He turned, looked back, and saw the young one watching from the canopy. Its eyes didn't glow, but they remembered. They didn't speak on the way out. Not because there wasn't anything to say, but because there was too much, and none of it would sound right under the weight of what they'd seen. Jonas limped between Ella and Lena, his arm draped weakly over Ella's shoulder, his face pale with exhaustion and something older. He wasn't the same man who walked into Timberline. He wasn't even the same boy who'd been taken so many years ago. Whatever passed between him and the creature in that nest, he hadn't told them yet. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he never would. The woods no longer felt threatening. They weren't calm either. They felt aware, like the trees were holding a collective breath, watching them leave, deciding if it was over, or if this was just another beginning. They reached the ranger station by dusk. The fire had gone out and the smell of cold ash hung in the air. Royce's old coat still sat folded on the windowsill. His whistle was gone. Lena didn't ask where. She already knew. The man had walked away with his eyes open and his name still intact. Rare in a place like this. Rare in a story that never wanted witnesses. Ella helped Jonas into the back of a government SUV 2 days later. The forest had been flooded with bodies by then. Not creatures, people, real men in uniforms. Local rangers, a few quiet suits from Olympia, someone with a badge that didn't match the state. They took photos, measured footprints, interviewed Ella in a white tent. They never called it an investigation. Jonas was moved to a private medical facility. No name, no address. Just coordinates given to Ella by a woman who wouldn't take off her sunglasses. "He needs treatment," she said. "The things he remembers are fragmented." She gave Ella a document to sign. Medical waiver. Psychological evaluation clearance. Ella didn't sign. Not at first. But they wouldn't let her see him otherwise. She stared at the line for 3 minutes before finally putting her name down. That was the last time she saw him. The doctors said he'd been transferred. No records, no answers. Just a paper trail that ended in a storage room. Weeks passed. Timberline was sealed. Formally, it was due to environmental instability. A gas leak, they said. Volcanic activity. Some whispered about spores, airborne toxins. Lena watched it all from a distance, through news clippings and briefings never made public. They blamed the disappearances on hallucinations, panic, wildlife attacks, everything but what was real. Then the mail came. No return address, no markings. Just a small wooden box, smooth and warm to the touch. Inside, a bracelet. The same one Sophie wore the day she vanished. No note. No explanation. Just that. Lena sat in the dark for hours, holding it like it still carried a pulse. A week later, Ella found her own package. Inside, a flash drive. She plugged it into her old laptop, hesitating as the screen flickered to life. The file played instantly, grainy, low-res, probably taken from her own camera gear. But not by her. The footage showed the nest, lit only by the filtered moonlight bleeding through the canopy above. Ella sat inside it, back against the wall. Her face was softer. She was smiling. Not the smile people put on when they're posing, but the kind that happens when something breaks and heals in the same second. In front of her was the small creature. It had curled up beside her, its long arm draped over her leg, like it was sleeping. She hadn't remembered this moment, but it was hers. A piece of time returned. The video ended without sound, but Ella kept watching the black screen for a long time. By November, Timberline was erased from the maps. Not covered. Gone. The roads leading in were repurposed. GPS rerouted over it. Drones dropped signal above it. No one mentioned the name anymore. It was as if the land had swallowed itself, or been swallowed by something older. But some stories don't close the way people want. Sometimes they leave the door cracked. 3 weeks after the last press conference, just before the first snow, Lena stood at the edge of a burned trail leading into the northern slope. It was twilight, and the mist moved like breath through the branches. A shape stepped out, small, covered in brown fur, damp from fog. A little girl, no older than 6. Her eyes were wide, not frightened, curious. She wore nothing but a threadbare cloak of moss and bark, and around her wrist, one of Ella's old bracelets. The girl raised her hand slowly, then waved, and before Lena could move, she turned and ran into the trees. Gone. No trail, no sound, just her presence, lingering like the echo of something sacred. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She sat beside the window, the bracelet Sophie once wore in her hand, and finally whispered, "Thank you." Whether to the trees or to the thing that still watched from within them, she didn't know. But it heard. Somewhere deep inside Timberline, a soft whimper answered. Not pain, not fear, grief, or maybe love, or maybe both. The drone rose steady on its axis, lifting above the last ring of mist curling through the canopy. It didn't hum like it used to. Not this one. This one was built to be silent. and yet something about the way it climbed felt reverent, like even the machine knew it was intruding on something sacred. Down below, the trees opened gently beneath its lens, revealing the familiar geometry of timberline from above. But it was changed now, subtly, like the forest had rearranged itself in the absence of human footsteps, folding into new shapes, organic, patterned, deliberate. Patches of pine and aspen formed spirals in the canopy, natural and yet too clean to be accidental. Pockets of emptiness sat between the shapes, like lungs halfway through breath. Then it caught something. Not movement, stillness. Too much of it, on a rise near the edge of the western bluff. Beyond where the last camp had burned out, stood a line of shapes. Black silhouettes, evenly spaced. Not animals, not people, figures. Dozens of them, motionless, backlit by the haze of late sun pushing down through gold and rust. The drone focused, not statues, not phantoms. They were alive, tall, broad, covered in coats of matted fur and lichen. Faces obscured by shadow, but each with eyes slightly aglow. Dim reflections not from the sun, but from within. They didn't blink, didn't shift, just stood, watching, and in the center one moved. Not to threaten, not to flee, to kneel. A massive shape, its shoulders rounded, arms long enough to touch the ground, stepped forward from the others and lowered itself to the dirt with impossible gentleness. It held something in its hand, a flower, yellow-white, wild. From the banks of a ridge long since eroded, it placed it carefully at the base of a twisted trunk. And there, wrapped around the root, half embedded in moss, was the bracelet, the same one, Sophie's, and now not lost. The drone stayed a few seconds longer, then pulled back, the image trembling as though it too had forgotten how to breathe. Far below, Lena Croft stood on the edge of a cliff, watching the feed on her screen. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just let the quiet settle around her. Let the wind press against her spine, and held the bracelet in her hand like it still carried a heartbeat. Behind her, the tree line shimmered. Not with light, but memory. There was no sign of Ella. Not anymore. No public record. No trace. But some nights, long after the headlines had faded and Timberline was locked down tighter than the vault beneath Mount Weather, someone would report seeing a figure on the edge of the woods. A woman, hair tangled with moss, wearing a jacket too torn to have survived a storm. Sometimes alone, sometimes holding hands with something smaller, furred and limping slightly. They always disappeared before anyone got close. Those reports never made it to print. Too much to explain. Too much to lose, but the memory stayed. And deep inside the reserve, beneath roots grown thick from silence and soil, the story continued just far enough outside the reach of language to remain sacred. Because what no one tells you is this: forests don't forget. They carry everything inside them. The cruelty, the kindness, the things buried so deep we think they're gone until a wind blows just right and a bone breaks through the earth. Timberline remembered every child who wandered too far, every name never spoken again, every promise made in a whisper when the world thought no one was listening. But the trees were listening, and they grieve slow, they forgive slower. But sometimes when the sky turns gold and the leaves burn quiet in the dusk, they let you see the things you're not supposed to. Not to punish, to teach. Because the forest is not just a place, it's a witness. It doesn't scream, it shows you. And when it gives something back, it's never the same as it was. But maybe that's the point. In the end, some stories are not meant to be tied up with answers, but carried with questions. Not to satisfy curiosity, but to remind us what it means to still wonder. Because there are places on this earth where silence isn't empty. It's full of things older than names, deeper than language, and more alive than most would dare to believe. Places where the boundaries between what is wild and what is human begin to blur. Not through fear, but through memory, through something that chooses not to speak, but to remember. What we think we own, The forest never truly gives. It only lends. The path, the breath, the time, and it watches what we do with those small gifts, how we treat the fragile, the forgotten, the misunderstood. Some wounds are buried in the ground, others walk the earth, but all of them in some way want to be seen, and maybe that's the quiet purpose behind it all. Not to find, not to prove, but to witness. To stand still long enough for the world to show us that it too has been watching. That compassion doesn't only live in our kind, that grief isn't limited by shape or voice. And that forgiveness, well, sometimes that takes a kind of strength no weapon could ever earn. This was never just about the unknown. It was about what we do when we meet it, how we respond when the wild doesn't bare its teeth but opens its arms, how we choose moment by moment not to conquer but to understand. Because the world is full of shadows, not all of them cruel. Some carry stories waiting to be remembered, kindness waiting to be returned. Some live in silence not because they have nothing to say, but because they are waiting for us to listen. And when we do, when we truly listen, what we hear can change us. Thank you for walking through the dark with us tonight, for holding space for what's often unseen and unloved. If this story moved you in any way, please let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts, your own stories, or what parts of this journey stayed with you. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, where mystery meets meaning, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and always, always leave a light on in the woods.